Lecture 11, Reproductive System. So let's begin by looking at the female reproductive system first. Here we have mid-sagittal section of the female reproductive system, and you can see some familiar structures that we learned in the earlier lectures. For example, that is the pubic bone, also called the symphysis pubis. That's where the two pubis bone is going to join together at the front, right? Your part of your pelvic girdle, the pubis bone at the front is going to join through this symphysis pubis, or the pubic bone right here. You can see things like the urinary bladder, that's the urethra. Over here you can see the rectum, right? And this would be your coccyx bone, your tailbone, right? With the sacrum here, and this would be part of your large intestine. So all these things are not part of the reproductive system. Everything else here would be part of that. So I'm gonna switch to the course pack, and we're gonna label this together just like we would in class. So this is page 77. Page 77. So over here, let us label the female reproductive system. Over here, we will start with this structure. So that is the ovary. Ovary is the female gonads, right? Gonads means reproductive organ, right? So in male, the reproductive organ are the testicles. In female, the gonads would be the ovary. So there are two ovaries, one on each side of the body. And over here we have a tube, where we have a tube that connects the ovary to the uterus. Okay, so this tube, oh, actually the ovary is over here. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong pointer. So the ovary is B, right, pointing at this oval structure, and C is pointing at the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube. Okay, also known as the oviduct. So what happens is the ovary is where you will be producing the eggs, and when the egg is released, it will go into the fallopian tube, and the fallopian tube is where fertilization will take place. Okay, fertilization of the egg occurs. Okay, so if you fertilize the egg in the fallopian tube, then it will get implanted in the uterus. Now, if fertilization takes place outside of the fallopian tube, then there is a risk of what we call ectopic pregnancy. That's when the implantation occurs elsewhere in the reproductive system other than the uterus, and that could be dangerous for the female. It could potentially destroy the reproductive system permanently as well. So to encourage the egg to go into the fallopian tube, you have these hair-like structures, right, called fimbriae. Okay, so they kind of guide the egg into the fallopian tube. Over here we have a suspensory ligament, right? It's the same name as the ones that we learned in the eye, but this one is obviously for a different function. It holds the ovary in place. That is the suspensory ligament. Okay. So the egg, if it's fertilized, it will be again implanted into the uterus here, and uterus is this label. Right? So this whole thing is the uterus. Let me color it in first, right there. So the uterus has various parts to it, and we are going to label each one of that as soon as I finish coloring here. So this main part of the uterus, the body of the uterus, is called the fundus. The fundus. Okay, and the neck of the uterus at the front here is called the cervix. So when the baby is growing inside the uterus, there's actually going to be a mucus plug that will form over here to seal the opening of the cervix, so nothing goes in, nothing comes out. When the water breaks, for example, and the baby is ready to come out, the mucus plug would actually come out first, right? And you know, that's how you know you break the water. So that's the uterus. Now the muscle of the uterus is very strong, and we call that the myo means muscle, myometrium. Okay, myometrium. This is just the muscle of the uterus. Okay, and the inner lining of the uterus, that is basically blood vessels, and in anticipation of a pregnancy, of an implantation, each month the blood vessels would grow, and if there is no pregnancy occurring, then those new blood vessels would shed, and that creates the menses, the blood flow that happens at the beginning of the cycle, the period. And so this here is called the endometrium. Okay, so myometrium is the muscle, endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. Okay, again, that's the blood vessels. All right. When the baby is growing in the uterus can get quite heavy, so you want to kind of hang it in place. You don't want it to descend, you don't want it to fall down too much. So to hold it in place is this round ligament. So the round ligament actually gets stretched quite a bit as the baby grows in the uterus, and you know, usually you can feel a tightness around this area, kind of like you know, the day after you did some strenuous exercise, you kind of have some muscle soreness. So you know, that's a sign that the round ligament is stretching. So we're gonna skip some of these labels. Over here, this you can see is the urinary bladder, right? So in the earlier units, you know, the urinary bladder is below the uterus. So again, when the baby is growing, it will be pushing down on the urinary bladder, increasing the urge to urinate. And so this here, this line, that would be the urethra, right, for the urine to come out. And over here, this is the vagina. Okay, so that is the female reproductive system, all the labels that you have to know. So let's switch back to the PowerPoint slides. A sagittal section through the ovary will show that it's made up of the outer cortex and the inner medulla, right? So you know, you should be familiar with this concept now. A lot of organs have a outer cortex and then the inner medulla, like the kidneys, right? Like the brain. So in the outer area, in the cortex, you will have many follicles. Okay, and these follicles basically contains an immature ovum, right, called an oocyte. Right, so the oocyte will eventually become the egg. So the female is born with as many as 2 million follicles, but the number is going to be drastically reduced to 300 to 400,000 by the time of puberty, right? And not all of these will become an egg, right? Each cycle, you know, the cycle length varies, but you know, on average, people say it's 28 day cycle. So each cycle, you will have one egg that will mature and be released from the ovary, and so only about 400 follicles will develop into the egg, and this will continue starting at puberty until menopause. Because the oocytes are present at birth, the oocyte will actually age and degrade as the woman gets older. So older women are more likely to produce children with chromosomal defects because of chromosome errors or damage that occurs in these follicles. So this is what's inside the ovary, and I'm just gonna you should study this slide yourself, take a look at it, but I'm just gonna draw a simplified version for you to help you understand this a little bit better. So the again, feel free to draw along if it helps you understand this concept. So here is the ovary, okay, and this is gonna be the fallopian tube, okay, fallopian tube, okay. And so in the ovary, what you're gonna have is you're gonna have these follicles, okay. So this is follicle, right? So let's consider our typical 28 days cycle. Okay, so the menstrual cycle, right? 28-day cycles. Again, for some women is longer, for some is shorter, but on average we say 28 days. Okay, so the cycle is separated into two phases. Okay, so the first phase here is called the follicular phase. Follicular phase. So during the follicular phase, as the name suggests, the follicle which contains the oocyte is going to develop. Okay, so it's going to grow. Right, the egg is going to grow. It's going to grow. It's going to grow. Okay, so as the follicle is growing, what's going to be happening is that your ovary will be releasing estrogen. And later on I will explain what estrogen does in a separate video. But after about 14 days, midway through the cycle, the follicle, the eggs inside the follicle would be ready. Okay, so when the egg is ready, is mature, then the egg will be released into the fallopian tube. Okay, so 1 to 14 days, you will have the follicle growing, and then you will be releasing the estrogen from the ovary. And at day 14, right, midway through the cycle, you will have ovulation. Which means the egg is going to be released into the fallopian tube, right? So if it meets a sperm in the fallopian tube, then the person is going to get pregnant, and that will create the zygote, which will then get implanted into the uterus. And after releasing the egg, the remaining material from the follicle is still going to be there. Okay, so there's going to be some remaining material after you release the egg. Okay, so this remaining material is going to grow into a structure called the corpus luteum. Okay, so the corpus luteum is not going to stay there for too long. Right? If pregnancy doesn't occur, the corpus luteum will grow and then it will break down. Okay, if there is no pregnancy, it will grow and then it will break down. If there is pregnancy, we'll talk about what happens later on. So this structure here, this is called the corpus luteum. Okay, so after releasing the egg, the leftover material will grow into this corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will pump out progesterone. Okay, progesterone. Right? And again, I'll explain what progesterone does later on. So this second half of the cycle, right? This day, we say day 15 to 28, right? We call this the luteal phase. Luteal phase. Right? So basically, in a 28 day cycle, right, or in any cycle, there are going to be 3 phases. We have the follicular phase, dominated by the release of estrogen as the follicle develops, you're gonna have the ovulation that happens after that, followed by the luteal phase, which is dominated by the release of progesterone from the corpus luteum. Okay, if there's no pregnancy, then the corpus luteum breaks down, and then the menses occur, the blood flow occurs, and then the whole cycle kind of repeats itself again. So here is the PowerPoint slides. This is the more complicated diagram, but it conveys the same information, right? You have the a follicle here growing, and again, as it's growing, follicle will pump out estrogen, and then you will release the egg into the fallopian tube in ovulation. Then the leftover stuff becomes the corpus luteum, and this will pump out progesterone. Right, so more on this later. This is talking about the female anatomy, and I already went through this with you as I was labeling the diagram with you in the course pack, so you can read through this yourself. Same thing over here, you can read through it. Now we're gonna talk about the hormonal regulation of the menstrual cycle, and I'm gonna be doing this in another video. But before you watch that video, you want to turn to page 72 and 73 of your course pack, and you can fill it in as you watch the next video.